In 2002, I was elected to city government in Vancouver, the Vancouver School Board to begin with, and then subsequently to Vancouver City Council. I spent 3 terms there. I think people in their head have a picture of the kind of people who get elected. I am not that picture, or was not that picture at least. I left home quite young and lived on the streets for quite a number of years. I was using drugs. I was involved in sex work as part of the if you're trying to procure income to be able to use the drugs or just survive, then that becomes part of the world that you're living in. Like street communities, there's a lot to recommend them. They're very authentic, they're very honest, they're extremely caring. You have a community around you that's very concerned about and caring for you, which is not always, in fact, I would say often, what you experience when you're not on the streets. I got involved in activism, and over time, I think the activism, I realized empowering myself was I was more interested in that as a way of dealing with the trauma that I experienced when I was younger. The idea of being able to take control of my own life and to be able to give people the tools that they needed to be able to decide how they wanted to take control of their own lives, that felt a lot more powerful and a lot more healing than getting really high did. We started to see the introduction of toxic heroin into the street drug supply. So it drives me a bit crazy because we always characterize these as overdose deaths. These are not overdose deaths. These are poisonings, right? These are people who, it'd be like if suddenly beer had a toxin put into it, we would start to see a lot of beer drinkers start to die. It's not because overdose sort of implies a choice, whereas these were not choices that people were making to die from using these drugs. I got pregnant and had a kid in 1997, so I was off drugs and busy raising a kid, so my direct involvement was not high, but at the time, friends of mine who were organizing on the street started up a group called the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. We had a housing society called Portland Hotel Society that had some visionary leadership in it, and the two of them together started organizing, like real grassroots, like eyeball to eyeball, door to door type organizing. They held a big conference on harm reduction to help build literacy around what do these words mean, how do we talk about this, trying to help people understand that it's about harm reduction to the user, but it's also about harm reduction to the surrounding community, right? We had a ton of injection sites in Vancouver at the time. The problem was they were all unsafe injection sites. People were injecting alone in hotel rooms. We had people injecting alone in car parks and in alleys and in just incredibly dangerous situations. And a safe injection site where you could control for, if there was an overdose, you could, or poisoning, you could intervene quickly, where the needles were clean, where people were using safe water supplies, like all the things that you need to reduce harm to the user. And through that, they're not in the alley leaving needles behind or other things that cause harm to the community as a whole. I think there was a level of compassionate conservatism at that time in the conservative political sphere that really helped leverage action on it. So we had progressives who believed that action was not just possible, but imperative. You had conservatives who were willing to give it a fair hearing, and they were frustrated with how long it was taking to negotiate it, so they just did it. They said, you say you're all supportive, basically arrest us if you show us whether you're supportive or not, because we just can't wait any longer. People are dying. So they opened it up. The 3 levels of government did not arrest them, showed up with money, showed up with, the police didn't show up, which is good. And Insite was born. And I should say, Vancouverites, it's not universal, but it's near universal support for safe injection site and policies aimed at harm reduction in community. So this government, this reactionary conservative government, was kind of playing to their base, which is not in Vancouver, and took on Insite as kind of a wedge issue, a political wedge issue. And it got pretty nasty at times. But I think this is where it was such a brilliant strategy for the community to use the court. So you submit facts, you have evidence, that evidence is publicly available, and if you submit incorrect evidence, then that can be challenged by the other side in court, and there's rules around how that happens, which is not how the front page of a newspaper works, or Twitter, or any of those things, right? Unanimous ruling that Insite was not only legal, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada provided for it, but actually necessary, and that they had an absolute right to be there. We now have, additionally, overdose prevention sites in the city and expansion of that. The data from Insite is quite conclusive that it greatly reduces deaths due to poison drug supply. It greatly reduces the incidence of chronic disease that is associated with drug use. And it also greatly increases the chances that you will go to treatment, assuming there's a treatment bed available for you.